Hey guys, in this video I'll show you how to edit not a double, but a triple exposure photograph. If you didn't already see the last video I did where we edited double exposure, I'll link that down below in the description. But in this video we're going to add an extra element by putting in a background as well. We're also going to introduce a couple other concepts like adding sun flares and high pass sharpening filters. Now you can do this effect with your own photos, but if you don't feel like sorting through everything for hours, and if you don't have anything usable, feel free to just download my images below, and you can also follow along step by step with everything that I'm doing on screen. So let's get started. So I've got my photos in this folder right here called Triple Exposure. The first one I'm going to bring in is this one with the fisherman, so I'll just drag this down onto Photoshop here. All right, when that comes up, we'll just hit OK, and then we'll see our first layer. So I'm going to uncheck this just so that we can work on this layer. And the first thing I want to do is transform this because I want the boy's head to be facing up a little bit more. So I'm going to hit Command T to transform. That's Control T on Windows. I'm using a Mac. We can just rotate this a little bit. I think I like that angle a little bit more. When I like it, I'll hit Enter to save the changes. So this is what we'll be working on. The first thing I want to do is create a selection of this boy. If you saw the last video, this is pretty similar to what we did there. So I select my quick selection tool, that's W on the keyboard. Let's zoom in here just to make sure that we're doing this correctly. And you can see my tool here. I'm going to make that bigger with the right square bracket key. And when you use this tool, you want to make sure that the plus icon here is selected. So I'll start up here with the hat and I'll just move around. There's quite a bit of contrast between the boy and everything else, the water in the background, so it's pretty easy to make this selection. So I can't go too much further. I'll zoom out. You can see I made a mistake and selected some water over here. That's all right. I'll zoom out by hitting Command minus or Control minus on Windows. So we've got a pretty good selection, but I went a little bit too far and selected this area over here. You can see right now I've got this plus icon. You can see it on the screen as well. If I change this to minus, I'll do that by holding down Option on Mac or Alt on Windows, and now I can take away from this selection. So with that held down, I'll just click and start coming around this area. There we go. So that's pretty good. We've already got a pretty nice selection here. Let's just zoom in, Command or Control plus, just to make sure that we're doing everything correctly. So there are a few small mistakes. I'll make this bigger, or smaller I mean, with the left square bracket, hold down Option or Alt, and fix this area here. All right, there's some mistakes here, but we'll use a different tool in a second to fix that. Right here, we could get that one. So again, if you want to take away from the selection, hold down Alt or Option, depending on which operating system you're using. And if you want to add to the selection, with this tool, you don't need to do anything because we've already got the plus selected, but with other tools, you'll need to hold down Shift to add to the selection. That's pretty good overall. I'm going to switch my tool to this lasso tool. I'm using the polygonal lasso tool, and that's L on the keyboard. Right now I want to subtract from the selection. You can see if I hold down Option or Alt that a minus icon shows up. So I'm just going to click with that held down. You only need to hold it for the first click. I'll click around here and get rid of that. To end the selection, you can just double click. So I'll do this, click around, double click. Now I want to add to the selection, so I'll hold down Shift and you can see a plus icon shows up. So I'll click, get this in here, a little bit rough, but this should be a good enough job. So I'll speed this up while I go around the edges. All right, overall this looks pretty good, but there's a few areas that are really tough to do with these two tools that we just used. So I'm going to zoom in here, and you can see in certain areas, this tool has actually done a really exceptional job of selecting this strand of hat. And some other parts in here, we're missing this little strand, but overall really nice. But those two tools alone are difficult to select everything with. You can see here we're missing some individual hairs, and around the face too, these eyelashes and the hair here. So overall it's done a really, really impressive job, but let's just fix this up. We can do that by hitting Select and Mask. And you can change the background transparency with this tool just to show you what you're selecting, what you're not selecting. I'll keep this somewhere around there because I want to see some of the hairs in here. And so with this tool, I want to make sure I'm using this one here, Refine Edge Brush, and I'll just paint over some of these areas that the selection didn't get. and it should do a pretty good job of bringing them back. So the eyelashes here, it's trying to do this by selecting what is contrasty. I can bring this little fiber back, and I'll paint over some of this hair here, especially on the edge. Pretty good overall. I'm not going to worry about any of the other edges. I'll just hit OK, and that's our final selection. So if I zoom out, you can hit Command or Control 0. And so with this selected, I'm going to click on this layer and hit Command or Control J to create a new layer. If we turn off this bottom layer, you can see our new layer is just the boy with everything else transparent behind him. So right now I'm going to hold down Command and click on him. Again, on Windows, that's Control. Every time I say Command, it means Control if you're using Windows. So with this selection, now we can add a mask to that. So I'll click on this mask tool here. We'll see what this does later on. Let's just rename these really quick. I'll call this Base, and I'll double click on this to call this Mask. I'll turn this back on. Now I'll click on the bottom layer, select my adjustment layers, go to Solid Color, and yeah, I want to add a white. You can change the color by moving around here, but I want to choose white background for now. It just shows me more clearly what I have as my background. We won't actually use this layer later on, but it's nice reference for now. I'll click and double call this white fill. So now we'll click on this boy. Up till now, all these steps are pretty much the same thing that we've done in the last tutorial. So with this selected, I'll choose another adjustment layer, and I will go to black and white. Okay. Here we can choose different presets, something that we think looks nice. Feel free to scan through these. I already did this once, and I'll choose green. I feel like that looks okay. You can also mess around with the individual colors here. I'm not really going to do that though. Well, maybe a little bit. There we go. And again, just like last time, we'll add a clipping mask. So you can hold down Option or Alt, hover between these two layers, and click. This won't be apparent yet what we're doing, but what we're doing is clipping this layer to this mask here. So everything that we do on this layer will be applied only to the white areas of the mask. If you're not too familiar with masks and what they do, they're one of the essential tools in Photoshop. I explained that more in the last video, so feel free to go back and watch that. This won't do anything yet because the background is white, and so it's not being affected anyway. But we'll see why we need this in a little bit. Again, just like last time, we'll go on top and add a curves layer. Here I'm just going to pull this up or down depending on if I want to lighten or darken the skin. So down will decrease the exposure, up will increase. I think adding a little bit of that will improve it. If I think I'm blowing out this highlight too much, we can just drag this down a little, maybe just a small amount. So again, on the right side of this, we have the highlights. On the left side, we have the shadows. Again, I'll add a clipping mask here. So Option or Alt, hover between the layers, click. Again, you won't be able to see what we're doing. So this is our base. What I'm going to do now is just minimize this and bring in the image that we'll use to put inside the boy's head. So we'll click on this inlay sunset and drag that also into Photoshop and hit OK. All right, we've got that. So with this selected, I'll hold down Command A to select all, Command C to copy, Command or Control W to close that layer, and then Command V to paste it on top here. We should know some of these hotkey combinations by now. Let's hit V to choose our Move tool up here, and we can just move this somewhere around where we're going to want it. About there for now is okay. And again, we'll create a clipping mask, Option or Alt, hover between the layers, and click. And now you can see what we're actually doing with these clipping masks. So we don't actually need to do clipping masks for these two, but since this layer is on top, it makes sense to clip it to this, clip that one to this, which is clipped to this mask. So now all three of these layers are clipped to the mask. So what that does is just, it only applies this image on top, the inlay layer, to the white parts of this mask, which we can see here. Everything that's black, we don't have this on it. So with my select tool, I'm just gonna move this somewhere close to where I want it. I kind of want to hide these motors on the back of the boat. They don't look very nice to me. So I'll move it up here, and I might also try and match the horizon here with the brim of the hat. Let's see. Yeah, around there is probably pretty good. That looks nice to me. So let's see what we can do now. I'm going to add, I'll call this Inle Sunset. This is Inle Lake in Myanmar. All these were taken last December from my trip to Myanmar. I'll add a white mask to that, and then I'll choose a black brush. So I'll hit B to choose my brush tool and make sure I have black selected here. If you don't, you can toggle back and forth by hitting X. And again, we can resize with the left square bracket. And I want to make sure that my brush is at 0 hardness. And pretty much all I want to do now is just reveal some of the features, the facial features. So I'll click around this area. And I'll get the chin in there as well. I'm going to fade this out. That's pretty good. Just need to cut off some of these transitions. So I don't want to see the edge of this photo. So something like that to fade it out looks good. Let's see what we can do with this. I might just cut that off later by cropping it out, but I'll make that determination later on. Right now I want to bring back enough that we can just get the neck in there. I'm going a little too far, but that's okay. We'll fix it in a bit. So that looks pretty good to me. So now I want to add this back, but I don't want to add it on the clothes. I only want to put it on his neck. So I'll zoom in here. I'll make this brush a little bit harder, maybe 50%, and I'll change it to white. So right now we were painting the effect out with black. We'll paint it back in with white. Having a slightly harder brush will just make this easier to go up against the edge without bleeding it over. So I'll do a pretty good job here. I'll just do it rough for now. Make sure I'm getting everything. If you need to make sure that you've gotten everything, you can hold down Option or Alt and click on the mask itself, and that will show you only the mask. You can see here I've missed a couple spots, so I can just paint them back in. It's a lot easier to see this way. So there we go. I'll come down here. Oops, I'm fading it out, so I don't want to do too much there. Let's just zoom in here, and I'll clean this up on the edge. If I bleed it over a little bit, you shouldn't be able to tell the difference too much because we're using this soft brush. You can always just be more precise just by zooming in even more. Pretty good. I'll come up as far as I can go. Eventually we'll hit the edge of this image. There we go. Let's just bring this back so we can see where it is, and we'll take it out later. All right. Keep going over here. There are more precise ways to do this, but generally the best tool to use is the simplest one that you can get away with. And I think that this looks seamless enough, or at least it will look seamless enough, that we can just continue on using the brush. So you may notice the more time you spend in Photoshop, there's about 1 million different ways to do masks. Some of them are really, really complex and also very, very precise. But generally, if you can get away with doing something with the brush or some other simple tool, then just go ahead and do it that way. It'll save you a lot of time. This is a pretty big area to cover. I'll speed this up for now. So we're back here. We just need to fix this transition down here. So I'll just change again to a black brush. I'll make this a lot bigger, and I'll make it 0% hardness, and I'll just give it a dab or two, and it will fade it out there. Pretty good. All right, so let's come in here, just make sure this all looks good. Looks fine to me. So let's keep going. I want to desaturate this area a little bit here just because it doesn't really match. It's really bright and vibrant, and everything else is this desaturated black and white layer. So let's go to adjustment layers. We'll choose vibrance, and I'll just pull this down maybe -50 or so. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. It now matches everything else that we have in the photo. Let's now look at what we can do with the background. But first, actually, let's paint some of this back. I don't want to make it completely black and white. There's a few other things that we can do just to bring it out a little bit more. So on the mask for this black and white layer, we'll choose a black brush, and I'm going to bring down the opacity maybe to 30 or 35 or something like that, and I'll paint black on this brush. So bringing down the opacity means that we're just painting this effect in 34% rather than 100%, and we'll bring back a little bit of color, but not all the color. So maybe add this in the skin a bit, in this top hat. It'll just make it look a little bit less flat. More of a monochrome look. That's pretty good for me. Okay, so now let's see, what else can we do here? Let's add in the background layer. So I'll click on this white layer. So right now the background is this white. So if we add a layer on top of this, that will be the background layer that we're seeing. So let's minimize here again. We'll bring in the final photo taken at Bagan, and we'll drag that into Photoshop and hit OK. And the same hotkey combination we used before to bring this file into our base file is just Command A, Command C to copy, Command W to close that window, and Command V to paste it on top of this white layer. You need to click on the white layer first and then hit Command V, and now we've got it in the background. I'll rename this Bagan Sunrise, and then I will choose my Move tool again, that's V on the keyboard, and just put this in a spot. Oops, I'll undo that. I'll need to click on this layer and then move it around. So let's see, where do I want this? Alright, actually I'm going to delete this layer for now, and I'll show you why. I just want to size everything down here. So I'm going to go to Image, Image Size. We'll just make this a little smaller so it matches the other image. The other one is not the full size. So maybe we'll just make this 3000 pixels for now. Hit OK. Alright, now it's a smaller image. It's still pretty big though. Let's come back and grab this file one last time. Hit OK again. And same thing, Command A, Command C, Command W, click on this, Command V. Now it should match up a little bit better. We'll drag this around. That's nice, yes. So I want to have this temple showing back here and have some of these other temples showing on the side. That's pretty good to me. Alright, so now there's way too much color in this background, so I can just click on this layer, again I'll call it Bagan, and I can just bring down the opacity a lot. I find this orange color a little bit distracting though, so I'm going to add an adjustment layer on top of this. Go to Hue, Saturation. If I change this now, I'm going to be affecting all of my different colors. I'll undo that. And instead I'll just go to Master and choose Yellows. The sky is pretty yellow, so it should select that tone. I'll pull down the saturation of the yellows. And so it's not really affecting the other colors, it's only affecting the areas that have yellow in it. Come down, -75, so it's almost 100% desaturated, but we've still got a little bit of yellow. Close this. Looks pretty good. We can come back to this layer and play around with the opacity again. Depends how much you want. I think something faded out will make this less noticeable. It's a nice complement to everything else, but this is not really the focal point of the photo, so let's bring this down quite a bit. I think that's pretty good for now. Let's see what we can do. I think first I'm going to crop this. So I'll choose the crop tool here, clear my previous settings. If you want to use Instagram settings, I'll do 1080 by 1350, and we can just move this around where we want it. I'm going to make it smaller also, and maybe I'll do some kind of rule of thirds thing and keep this boy's eye right on this point here. I don't want to have this harsh edge in the photo, so I'll pull this in a little bit more. Drag it down. That's pretty good. We can cut off the top of the hat. Depends what you want to do. Feel free to play around with things. We could always make this bigger out here if we want to have the top of the hat. Maybe place it so his eyes are still on the line. Oops. I think that's close enough to rule of thirds that it should be pretty good. Whatever, we'll play around with this on your, you can play around with this on your own. I don't think it's too important for the sake of this tutorial though. That looks pretty good. So now let's add a few last minute things that we didn't touch on in the first tutorial. This just gives you some more options here, I think. Let's see, the first thing I might want to do is to fade out the boy a bit. So we can do that by coming to this mask where we have the boy layer, zoom in here, and maybe I think this shoulder is kind of distracting. The pose that he's in doesn't look too flattering. So let's choose our quick select tool again, W on the keyboard, and we'll select just some of this area around the chin and there. And if we want to fill this in with black, we can choose, let's put black as our background color. I just prefer doing it this way. And you can hit delete or backspace when you have this mask selected. You don't want to have the layer selected, you need to have the mask selected. Hit that, and that will just get rid of it for us. So that's pretty good there. Now I'm just going to make this a little bit more artistic. Again, choose my brush tool. I want a black brush. I want a soft brush, maybe not 0. Pull it up a little bit. And I'll start painting to fade this out. Let's zoom in. Ooh, I need to bring up my opacity to 100 again. Let's see, I think that I'll just don't want these harsh transitions in there. Paint all this out down here, don't need any of that. And I'll just fade it so that you can see the nice parts. Maybe get rid of the paddle. You can play around with that transition if you think it's still too harsh, but I think it looks pretty good to me. So let's just stick with that for now. A few last minute things that we can do. One hotkey combination that's really useful to remember, if we click on the top layer and we want to just work on a brand new clean layer rather than having to worry about all these crazy layers below, we can hit Shift, again with the top layer selected, Shift, Option, Command E, and that will stamp everything down to a new clean layer. If we turn this off and on, it won't do anything because this top layer is just a combination of everything underneath. If you're using Windows, that will be Shift, Alt, Control E. Okay, so let's see what else we can do here. I'm going to click on this top layer, go to Filter and Camera Raw Filter. Camera Raw is pretty much the exact same thing as Lightroom. You have all the same controls. The interface is a little bit different, but it's pretty similar. I'll click on my brush tool and I want to add a sun flare. For this kind of thing, you'll just need to memorize these settings that I'm using. I use these a lot when I'm doing sun flares, so it's worth memorizing. I put my temperature to 100 to mimic the color of the sun, yellow. I'll set exposure to +1, I'll bring contrast all the way down, and I'll put shadows somewhere around 50 and black somewhere around 29. I use this a lot and it's a nice technique. I'll make this bigger, again that's the square brackets, and just click somewhere around here, and that just adds a little flare onto the face. You can see what it does. I think that will just stick to this side. You can click out here, you can click more than one time to add to it. I think that's pretty good overall though. Don't want to go too far. Let's get out of the brush. I'll click on this to get out of it. And I might add a little bit of vignette to this. So that's under FX. And I'll pull this down. Don't want to go too far or else it's really obvious what you're doing. But usually around -15 is pretty good, and that will just bring some attention into the middle. So that just adds some black to the edges. If we go this way, it's adding white, but that looks terrible. So -15 is usually pretty good. It's best to be subtle. We'll hit OK. And so we'll name this Camera Raw. And now, let's see, we can do one last thing. We'll add a little bit of sharpening to pull out the detail in the eyes. So I can duplicate this layer, Command J, and I'm going to call this High Pass. A high pass filter will just add some extra pixels around edges where it detects detail. So you can hit filter up here, go to other, high pass. I'll set this pretty aggressively. This is usually more than I use, but I'll do 5 pixels. Now you get this mess of gray, but what you can see is happening is that it's adding some extra pixels to the areas where there's detail. So the mouth, the eyes, the collar, things like that. I don't want this gray thing on my screen, so I'm going to change the blending mode to overlay. And it's hard to tell what this is doing, but if we turn this off and on, you can see it's just adding some extra definition to some areas. We don't want this everywhere, so I'm going to add a black mask. Black means you can't see it, you won't be able to see this layer at all. So I'll hold down Option or Alt with the layer selected, click to add a black mask, and I'll just paint it white back in the areas that we want to bring out. So this is usually the features. I don't want to do it on the teeth, so I'll just make this smaller and add it only to the lips. And maybe I'll do a little bit in the hair here and maybe the edge of the hat as well. So if we come down here, it might be difficult to see this on your screen, but if I turn it off and on, it's just pulling out the details more so that the viewer pays more attention to them. I think that looks pretty good. And I think that we will call that our final image. If you want to export it, you can come up to File, Export, but we've already gone over this in past videos and I don't want to show you all the basic steps every single time. So I hope you guys found that useful. That's pretty much just one way that you can take your typical double exposure and add a few additional elements to it to make it more interesting. In this video, we covered a few things that I didn't mention in the first attempt. So if you found this a little bit too difficult or you think I'm moving a little bit too fast, feel free to go back and watch the other video. But to wrap things up, I just want to highlight some of the other things that we introduced on this attempt. Obviously, there's the background layer, which took this from a double to a triple exposure. But on top of that, there's also the sun flare and the high pass filter, which are things that I tend to use in a lot of my other photos. Anyway, I hope you got something out of this video. I think the best way to learn this kind of thing is just to download the images, follow along step by step with everything that I'm doing, and you tend to soak up knowledge a lot faster that way, probably 10 times the amount as if you're just watching this and absorbing everything. If you're actually following along step by step with everything I'm doing on screen, you're going to learn a lot faster. I guess since I'm now YouTubing, I might as well mention that you should subscribe to this video or subscribe to my channel, like the video. I'm not very good at this kind of thing yet. But anyway, if you're interested in learning more stuff like this, I recommend checking the links below. I'm organizing weekly photo events, weekly photo challenges. This is all during the lockdown period, so by the time that you watch this, it might be a little bit different. But hopefully you find something useful in there, and I hope that you can join us for a live event, and hopefully you can get something out of this as well. So see you next time.